There is a specific, suffocating kind of silence that falls over a room when something truly unforgivable happens. It is not a peaceful, calming quiet. It is a heavy, toxic stillness that physically presses down on your chest, rings in your ears, and makes the blood in your veins run absolutely freezing cold. I will never, as long as I live, forget that awful sound. The wet, sharp, disgusting noise of my 28-year-old sister, Avelini, spitting directly into the face of my sweet, innocent 8-year-old son. It all happened in a fraction of a second, yet it felt like it played out in excruciating slow motion. We were sitting around the grand, polished mahogany dining table at my parents' house. It was the exact same table where we had celebrated every major holiday since I was a little girl, a table that was supposed to represent family, warmth, and gratitude. The crystal water glasses caught the light from the expensive chandelier overhead. The heavy silver cutlery gleamed against the pristine white linen tablecloth. Everything looked picture-perfect, like a scene out of a high-end lifestyle magazine. But beneath that polished surface, the air was thick with the usual unspoken tension and resentment that always accompanied family gatherings. My son, Beckett, had been trying his absolute best to be completely invisible. He was a quiet, deeply observant little boy, and he always knew that my family did not truly want him there. His small hands were shaking slightly as he reached across the table to pass the heavy glass bowl of homemade cranberry sauce. The bowl was slick with condensation, and his little fingers just could not get a proper grip. It slipped. It did not shatter, it did not even spill entirely. Just a tiny fraction, maybe a spoonful, of the dark red sauce splashed over the edge and landed on the sleeve of Avelini's brand new, ridiculously expensive designer silk dress. What followed was pure, unadulterated nightmare. Avelini shot up from her heavy wooden dining chair so fast it nearly tipped backward. Her face, usually carefully contoured with expensive makeup, twisted into a mask of pure, ugly, primal rage. She slammed both of her perfectly manicured hands down onto the table, making the fine china plates rattle loudly. She leaned forward, her face just inches from my terrified little boy, and screamed at the absolute top of her lungs. "He is not real family. Get out. Get him out of my sight right now." And then, before I could even process what she was doing, she spat on him. Beckett hit the floor. He literally scrambled backwards off his tall chair, losing his balance, and fell hard onto the polished hardwood floor, curling his small body into a tight little ball defensively. He froze in sheer terror. His big brown eyes were wide with a kind of fear that no child should ever have to feel, especially not in a home filled with people who are supposed to protect and love him. I looked frantically around the dining room, waiting for someone, anyone, to do something. To yell, to intervene, to express even a shred of human decency. My father, Ulrich, simply stared down at his mashed potatoes, meticulously avoiding eye contact with me or his grandson, chewing slowly as if nothing had happened. My mother, Callista, actually let out an exasperated, dramatic sigh, subtly rolling her eyes as if Beckett falling to the floor in terror was somehow an annoying inconvenience to her perfect Thanksgiving aesthetic. They just watched. They sat there and did absolutely nothing. As if my son was a stray dog that had wandered in from the rain. My husband, Merrick, stood frozen by the large bay window. He grew up in a household where conflict equated to severe emotional danger, and his deep-seated childhood trauma always caused his brain to default to freezing instead of fighting. He looked paralyzed, his knuckles white as he gripped the windowsill, unable to form words. I did not scream. I did not throw my glass of red wine directly into Avelini's smug face, even though every single instinct, every fiber of my being, begged me to tear the entire dining room apart with my bare hands. Instead, I felt a strange, cold, hyper-calculated calm wash over my entire body. I slowly stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I walked over to where my son was curled up on the ground. I knelt down beside him, pulled a soft linen napkin from the table, and gently, carefully wiped the foul spit from his soft, trembling cheek. He looked up at me, his lip quivering, and whispered a tiny, heartbreaking apology. That single, fragile whisper shattered my heart into a million pieces, but it also poured concrete over my resolve. I picked him up, holding his face securely against my shoulder so he would not have to look at those monsters for 1 second longer. Then I turned and walked back to my spot at the table. Avellini was still standing there, breathing heavily, looking incredibly proud of herself. She wanted a screaming match. She wanted me to lose my temper so she could play the victim and call me crazy. Instead, I reached into my large leather tote bag and pulled out a single, thick manila envelope. I dropped it right onto the exact center of her empty, pristine white plate. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. I looked her dead in the eye, my expression completely blank, and said 6 incredibly quiet words. "My lawyer is already involved, Avellini." Her smug, arrogant smile vanished instantly. The heavy silver fork she was clutching in her right hand slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered loudly against the fine china. The entire room froze. Nobody breathed. My parents finally looked up, deep confusion spreading across their faces. They thought I was just being overly dramatic. They genuinely thought I was bluffing about some petty civil lawsuit over a stained silk dress. But they had absolutely no idea what was actually inside that thick envelope. They did not know what I had discovered exactly 3 weeks ago, hidden away in a dusty commercial file cabinet. A secret so dark, so greedy, and so utterly vile that it was about to burn their entire fake, perfect, wealthy lives straight to the ground. They truly thought they held all the power in this family. They were dead wrong. What on earth do you think they did to push a loving mother to the very edge of utter, ruthless destruction? To truly understand why that horrifying moment at the Thanksgiving table was the final, devastating nail in the coffin, you have to understand the decades of quiet, grinding, soul-crushing misery that came before it. You do not just wake up one random sunny morning and decide to systematically annihilate your own flesh and blood. It takes years and years of them carefully laying the bricks of their own destruction. One cruel remark, one wildly unfair comparison, one stolen opportunity at a time. My childhood home was a museum of pain, and I was the exhausted curator who had finally, decisively, decided to lock the doors and burn the entire building to the ground. I am 32 years old now, and I run a highly successful, mid-sized commercial logistics and freight forwarding company. We handle massive shipping contracts for commercial properties across 3 different states. I built this entire enterprise from absolutely nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean literally nothing. When I turned 18, my father handed me a cheap, cracked plastic suitcase, opened the front door, and told me it was time to figure the real world out on my own. I paid for my grueling community college business classes by working terrible night shifts at a run-down, grease-stained diner off the highway. I went home every morning smelling like stale black coffee, cheap fryer oil, and desperation for 3 years straight. I bought my very first used delivery truck with crumpled dollar bills I kept hidden in an old shoebox beneath my mattress. I missed out on parties. I missed out on sleep. I missed what were supposed to be the most carefree, joyful years of my youth, just to survive. Avellini, on the other hand, was the undisputed golden child. The sun literally rose and set on her perfectly styled, expensive hair. While I was hauling heavy cardboard boxes in the freezing, biting rain, my parents happily drove her to a dealership and bought her a brand new, fully loaded BMW for her 18th birthday. When she eventually decided she did not want to attend college because reading textbooks was just too stressful for her energy, they actually patted her on the back, took her out to a fancy dinner, and praised her for protecting her mental peace. Then, 3 years ago, Avellini suddenly decided she wanted to be a spiritual entrepreneur. So, my parents enthusiastically funded a massive, absurdly expensive holistic wellness spa in one of the most premium commercial districts in the city. She had 0 business experience, 0 financial literacy, and 0 work ethic. The spa bled thousands of dollars from day one. She bought healing crystals that cost more than my first truck. But my parents blindly covered every single massive financial loss, smiling for family photos the whole time, pretending she was a genius businesswoman. I was the invisible child, the workhorse, the reliable, boring one. My hard-earned successes were completely ignored, while Avellini's mere breathing was celebrated with champagne. But I accepted it. I made a quiet peace with the harsh fact that I would never, ever be the daughter they truly wanted. I poured my energy into my growing business, and I focused intensely on my husband, Merrick. He was kind, gentle, and though he deeply struggled with confrontation due to his own past, he loved me fiercely and unconditionally. Everything shifted permanently when Merrick and I decided to adopt Beckett. I had learned early in my marriage that I could not have biological children, a devastating medical fact that had caused me endless nights of silent, agonizing grief. That grief only lifted on the miraculous day the adoption agency placed that beautiful, fragile, wide-eyed little boy into my arms. The moment I held him against my chest, I knew my life finally had a profound purpose that went far beyond profit ledgers, freight schedules, and commercial invoices. He was my son, my heart, my whole world wrapped in a tiny blanket. I naively, stupidly thought that the arrival of a grandchild would finally soften my parents' hard hearts. I thought the sheer innocence of a helpless baby would bridge the massive gap between us. I brought him over to their large, immaculate house for the very first time on a sunny Sunday afternoon. I was practically bursting with pride, carrying him gently in his little blue car seat. My mother, Callista, met me at the front door. She did not reach out her arms to hold him. She did not coo. She did not even offer a polite smile. She simply looked down at this tiny, peacefully sleeping baby, and then slowly looked up at me with eyes so incredibly cold they could have frozen boiling water. She leaned in close, keeping her voice low so my father would not hear from the living room, and delivered a line that I still hear echoing in my darkest nightmares. Why on earth would you take an estray when you can just pay a doctor to have a real one? I remember standing there on the porch, feeling the blood completely drain from my face, my stomach dropping into my shoes. I should have turned around, walked down the driveway, and disappeared from their lives forever right then and there. But society deeply conditions you to keep trying. Family is family, right? You force yourself to swallow the poison and desperately hope it magically turns into honey in your stomach. So I stayed. And for 8 incredibly long years, I watched them systematically treat my beautiful son like a second-class citizen. They happily bought Avellini's future, non-existent children incredibly expensive savings bonds, while giving Beckett cheap, generic plastic toys from the discount aisle of the grocery store. They consistently left him out of the framed family photos on the mantle. They conveniently forgot his birthday more times than I care to count, always claiming they were just too busy with Avellini's spa emergencies. I built a massive, impenetrable fortress around my heart. I told myself every day that I was strong enough to handle their rejection. But seeing them direct that exact same toxic, burning disdain toward an innocent child, my child, ignited a slow, terrifyingly hot-burning fire deep in the center of my chest. I realized that my old survival mechanism was no longer protecting me, it was actively exposing my son to emotional abuse. I had been willing to quietly play the role of the invisible daughter for the rest of my natural life. But I was not going to let them make Beckett the invisible grandson. I knew something in this toxic dynamic had to break. I just never expected I would be the one holding the heavy iron hammer. How much more evidence did I really need to finally realize these people were not just oblivious, but actively, intentionally evil? The true, spectacular unraveling of my family's pristine image did not actually start with a scream or a violent slap at a dinner table. It started with a completely mundane, slightly torn piece of white mail, exactly 3 weeks before that fateful Thanksgiving disaster. Because my logistics company is quite large and handles massive commercial mail routing for several sprawling office parks in the regional area, we occasionally intercept misdelivered parcels and letters before returning them to the original sender. It was a cold, rainy Tuesday afternoon when my warehouse manager walked into my office and handed me a thick, heavy certified envelope. It was formally addressed to my father, Ulrich, but the barcode label was badly smeared by the rain, and the automated postal service machines had accidentally routed it to my company's secondary overflow warehouse address. That specific address used to be registered under my father's name many years ago when he briefly tried to run a consulting firm that went nowhere. Normally, I would just toss it onto the passenger seat of my car and drop it off at his house on my way home, not giving it a second thought. But the return address printed in the top left corner caught my eye and made my breath catch in my throat. It was from a highly prestigious estate management and legal firm that had handled my late grandfather Soren's massive assets. Grandpa Soren was the only person in my entire extended family who ever treated me with genuine respect and warmth. He taught me how to fish, he taught me how to read financial statements, and he always told me I had a brilliant mind. He passed away 4 years ago, leaving a gaping hole in my life. After his funeral, my parents told me very briefly that the estate was horribly tied up in complex probate issues and overwhelming debt, and there was nothing left for anyone. Sitting at my desk, a weird, heavy, nagging feeling settled deep in the pit of my stomach. The envelope was already partially torn open at the flap from the rough sorting machine. I repeatedly told myself it was a massive invasion of privacy. I firmly told myself to put it down and walk away. But the haunting memories of my mother coldly calling Beckett a stray violently echoed in my mind. My hands seemed to move entirely on their own. I slipped my finger under the torn flap, opened it, and pulled out a remarkably thick stack of crisp financial statements and a certified copy of a highly complex legal trust document. I put on my reading glasses, started reading the dense legal jargon, and within 5 agonizing minutes, my entire world completely tilted on its axis. Grandpa Soren had absolutely not left his money tied up in probate, nor was he in debt. That was a bold, calculated lie. He had actually created a massive, multi-million-dollar educational and security trust fund. It was explicitly, beautifully designed to be divided equally among all his grandchildren and their future children. The legal language was crystal clear, undeniably binding, and meticulously drafted. There was a specific, highlighted section listing the beneficiaries. My name was there. Avellini's name was there. And right below mine, typed in bold black ink, was Beckett's name. Grandpa Soren had deeply loved Beckett. He had specifically, legally ensured my son would be well taken care of, officially recognizing him as his great-grandson, making it clear that love, not biology, made a family. But as my eyes flipped frantically to the second page, my heart essentially stopped beating. Attached was a heavily modified, legally stamped amendment dated just 3 months after my grandfather's funeral. The amendment showed massive, shocking withdrawals from the main investment fund. I scanned the numbers, my eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror as the zeros blurred together. The withdrawals totaled exactly $450,000. $450,000. Gone. Completely evaporated from a sacred fund meant to secure our family's future. I furiously traced the detailed paper trail provided in the estate's audit summary. The money had not just vanished into thin air or bad stocks. It had been systematically and intentionally funneled into a newly formed limited liability company. I immediately pulled up the official state business registry on my dual monitors, my fingers flying aggressively across the keyboard. The mysterious LLC was officially registered to none other than my father, Ulrich. The attached banking documents detailed exactly where every single penny of that $450,000 had gone. There was a massive, $90,000 wire transfer sent directly to an elite luxury car dealership. That was the exact, to the penny price of the brand new Porsche Avellini had been driving around for the past year, the same car she constantly claimed she bought with the incredible profits from her successful spa. Another $300,000 had been dumped directly into the operating account of Avellini's failing holistic wellness center to desperately keep it from going completely bankrupt. The remaining $60,000 had been frivolously spent on extravagant European vacations and a ridiculously high-end kitchen remodel for my parents' house. But the absolute most gut-wrenching, soul-destroying part of the document was not the stolen money. It was the final page of the legal amendment. It was a scanned photocopy of the original beneficiary list. Avellini's name was pristine and untouched. But next to Beckett's name, someone had taken a thick red marker and violently, repeatedly crossed his name out until the ink bled through the paper. In the margin, written in my father's unmistakable, sharp, arrogant handwriting, were two distinct words. Not blood. I sat perfectly still at my heavy wooden desk for 3 solid hours, staring blindly at those two words. The air in my large office suddenly felt terribly thin and suffocating. They had not just stolen my son's financial future. They had entirely erased his existence. They had looked at a beautiful legal document designed out of love to protect him, and they had maliciously decided he simply did not deserve to exist in our family line because he did not share their genetic DNA. They stole my son's college fund so they could buy Avellini a shiny sports car and pretend she was successful. I did not cry a single tear. I did not throw my coffee mug against the wall. The deep, heavy sadness I had carried my entire life vanished in a heartbeat, entirely replaced by a terrifying, icy, hyper-focused rage. The kind of absolute rage that makes you very quiet, very still, and incredibly dangerous. They had weaponized my beloved grandfather's legacy. They had committed blatant financial fraud to fund their pathetic delusions of grandeur. I carefully, meticulously made high-quality copies of every single page. I placed the original documents in the heavy steel safe hidden in my office floor. Then I picked up my phone. I knew I could not just drive over there and confront them screaming. If I yelled, they would immediately deny it, quickly hide the rest of the remaining assets offshore, and successfully paint me as a hysterical, jealous, crazy sister to the rest of the family. No, I was going to dismantle their entire lives, piece by piece, brick by brick, until there was nothing left but dust. I dialed a specific phone number I had kept buried in my contacts for a very long time, desperately hoping I would never actually need it. It belonged to a woman named Delphine. She was a ruthless, brilliant corporate attorney famously known for tearing fraudulent trustees apart with terrifying precision. The phone rang twice before she answered. I took a deep, steadying breath. Delphine, I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, steady and hard as diamond. I need to hire you immediately. And I need to completely destroy my family's financial infrastructure. She paused for a moment, the sound of keyboard clicking in the background stopping, then replied smoothly. Come to my office in exactly 1 hour. The game had fundamentally changed. They thought I was just a dumb workhorse they could ignore and steal from. They were about to find out exactly what happens when the workhorse decides to kick the heavy barn doors completely off their hinges. But how exactly does one legally trap a family of wealthy narcissists who truly believe they are utterly untouchable? Walking into Delphine's downtown law office was exactly like stepping into a high-tech, heavily fortified armory. She was a striking woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in a razor-sharp, tailored gray suit, with piercing dark eyes that felt like they missed absolutely nothing. She did not offer me warm platitudes, she did not offer fake sympathy, and she certainly did not offer me a tissue. She simply motioned for me to sit down, poured 2 cups of strong black coffee from a silver carafe, sat across from me at her massive glass desk, and commanded, "Show me exactly what you have." I silently unzipped my leather briefcase and laid out the crisp copies of the trust documents, the estate tax forms, the state business registry printouts, and the horrific photocopy showing my father's cruel red handwriting. Delphine read through every single page in total silence. The only sound in the large, expansive room was the rhythmic ticking of a heavy antique clock on the wall and the crisp turn of paper. When she finally looked up, there was a highly dangerous, almost predatory glint in her eyes. "Your father is an absolute, monumental idiot," she stated flatly, tapping the paper. "And your sister is going to federal prison." I blinked, genuinely stunned by the sheer bluntness and severity of her immediate assessment. Prison? For taking trust money? I thought it would just be a messy civil suit. Delphine leaned forward, resting her elbows on the glass, tapping a perfectly manicured fingernail aggressively against the final amendment page. "They didn't just take it, Sloan. Look very closely at the authorization signatures required to move investment funds of this massive magnitude." I leaned in and squinted at the bottom of the complex authorization form. There were 3 distinct signature lines. My father's signature, acting as the primary trustee. My mother's signature, acting as secondary. And then a third signature that made my blood run icy cold the moment I truly registered it. It was my name, Sloane, written in a flowing cursive style that looked incredibly similar to my actual handwriting, but lacked the sharp, angular edges I naturally used on my letters. They forged my signature, I whispered, the sheer, breathtaking reality of their massive crime finally sinking into my bones. Exactly, Delphine said, leaning back in her leather chair. Wire fraud. Document forgery. Massive breach of fiduciary duty. Grand theft of inheritance. This isn't just a petty civil dispute between siblings, Sloane. This is a severe federal crime carrying heavy mandatory minimums. Your sister's entire spa business and that shiny $90,000 Porsche are legally considered fruits of a poison tree. The government can and will seize them. A massive, incredibly complex plan began to form in my mind. A beautiful, devastating, completely airtight plan. But I needed much more than just a standard lawsuit. I wanted pure, undeniable poetic justice. I wanted to trap them in a legal and financial corner they could never, ever talk or buy their way out of. I looked at Delphine, my mind racing. Avellini's Wellness Spa. It is located in the premium Cypress Creek Commercial Plaza, isn't it? Delphine quickly checked her laptop, her fingers flying over the keys. Yes. Suite 400. Why do you ask? I smiled, and for the very first time in 3 long weeks, it was a genuine, terrifying smile. My logistics company handled all the heavy freight and shipping for the entire Cypress Creek Plaza. I knew the senior property manager, a sharp man named Xander, very well. Xander and I had done a lot of highly lucrative professional favors for each other over the past 5 years. I also happened to know through the commercial grapevine that the plaza's ownership group had recently been aggressively restructuring their commercial debt due to a massive downturn in luxury retail leasing. Delphine, I asked carefully, weighing my words. If a commercial tenant is severely behind on their monthly rent and holding a massive amount of commercial lease debt, can that specific debt be legally bought out by a private third party? Delphine's eyebrows raised in genuine appreciation of where I was going with this. Yes, it happens in high-level commercial real estate frequently. Distressed debt is quietly sold off to aggressive collection agencies or private holding entities all the time to balance the books. I stood up and began pacing the length of her office. I absolutely knew Avellini Spa was failing miserably. She was constantly running desperate social media promotions and loudly complaining at family dinners about the lack of foot traffic. The stolen trust money was likely just a temporary, bleeding band-aid to cover her massive, unsustainable overhead costs. I called Xander the very next morning. We met at a quiet, greasy spoon diner on the rough edge of town, far away from anyone who might recognize us. Over terrible coffee and burnt toast, I laid out my extremely specific proposition. I wanted to quietly buy the commercial debt holding on Avellini Spa. Xander laughed out loud at first, thinking I was making a bizarre joke. But when I slid a heavy, certified cashier's check across the sticky table, his entire demeanor changed instantly. The property owners were desperate to offload non-performing, toxic leases. They happily sold me Avellini's massive debt for pennies on the dollar. By the end of that week, my company, Sloane Logistics LLC, was officially and legally the sole owner of Avellini's commercial lease debt. I was technically her landlord. I was her primary creditor. I literally owned the very ground her fake, pathetic empire was built on. But Delphine warned me sternly before I left her office. We have the documents, Sloane. We have the debt. But if we strike right now, they will hire expensive defense lawyers and claim the forgery was a simple family misunderstanding, that the money was an agreed-upon loan, that you verbally authorized it. We need them on the record. We need them relaxed, deeply arrogant, and openly admitting to their toxic ideology regarding your son. How exactly do we do that? I asked, my heart pounding. You are going to Thanksgiving dinner, Delphine instructed coldly. You are going to wear a nice dress. You are going to smile. You are going to compliment the damn turkey. And you are going to wear a high-quality digital wire. I agreed without hesitation. I had to become the ultimate, Oscar-worthy actress. I had to willingly walk into the lion's den and let them completely believe they were still the apex predators. Would I actually be able to stomach sitting across the table from the exact people who erased my son's future while pretending everything was perfectly fine? The 45-minute drive to my parents' massive suburban house on Thanksgiving Day felt like the absolute longest journey of my entire life. My husband, Merrick, drove the car in incredibly tense, heavy silence. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were stark white. He knew something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I had told him a very abbreviated, sanitized version of the truth, mostly that my parents had been hiding some important financial documents regarding the old estate, and I simply needed to gather more information for a lawyer. I absolutely could not tell him the full, horrific extent of the theft, or about the forged signature, because I knew he would not be able to hide his sheer disgust. Merrick wore his big heart right on his sleeve, and today, I needed everyone in my camp wearing impenetrable iron armor. Beckett sat quietly in the back seat, completely oblivious to the impending war, happily playing with a small plastic toy truck. My heart physically ached looking at his sweet reflection in the rearview mirror. He was so pure, so innocent. He had absolutely no idea he was walking right into a house built entirely on lies, fraud, and money stolen directly from his own future. Just before we got out of the car, I pretended to check my makeup in the visor mirror. In reality, I pulled out my phone, opened the high-quality voice recording app Delphine had recommended, pressed record, locked the screen, and carefully slipped the phone deep into the breast pocket of my thick, tailored blazer. I tested it earlier. It was picking up every single whisper with crystal clarity. The exact moment we walked through the heavy oak front door, the overpowering smell of roasted turkey and the sharp sound of fake, high-pitched, wealthy laughter hit me like a physical blow. The house looked immaculate, almost sterile in its perfection. The newly renovated kitchen, paid for entirely with Beckett's stolen trust fund, gleamed brightly with custom imported marble countertops and high-end, commercial-grade stainless steel appliances. "Sloan, you finally made it," Avellini practically sang from the living room, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She was wearing an emerald green silk dress that easily cost more than my first delivery truck. She sauntered over, holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne, and did a dramatic, theatrical twirl. "Do you absolutely love it?" "I bought it to celebrate the spa officially hitting its 1-year anniversary. Business is just booming. I can barely keep up with the client waitlist." It took absolutely every single ounce of my trained willpower not to laugh hysterically directly in her face. I knew exactly how much crippling debt she was in. I literally owned the paper stating she was 6 months behind on rent. "It's very lovely, Avellini," I forced myself to say, keeping my voice perfectly steady and light. My father was proudly pouring expensive red wine at the new Marble Island counter. He looked up, puffing his chest out like a proud peacock. "Avellini works so incredibly hard, Sloan. She deserves a little luxury in her life. Did you happen to see the new Porsche in the driveway when you pulled up? $90,000 of pure, imported German engineering. Paid in full, in cash. That is exactly what real success looks like in this family." I gripped the cold edge of the marble counter so hard my fingernails dug into my palms, feeling the stone beneath my fingers. "It is an incredibly impressive car, Dad. You must be very, very proud of your brilliant financial planning." The dinner itself was an excruciating, hours-long exercise in psychological self-control. We all sat down at the large, formal dining table. Avellini completely dominated the conversation, bragging endlessly about her high-profile pseudo-celebrity clients, her insanely expensive new skincare lines, and her upcoming luxury trips to Europe. My parents hung on her every single word, feeding her massive ego like devoted subjects aggressively worshipping a false queen. I bided my time. I waited patiently for the absolute perfect moment. It finally came right after my mother brought out the second expensive bottle of wine. The alcohol had clearly loosened their tongues, and their inherent, toxic arrogance was fully on display for the recording device in my pocket. You know, Mom, I said casually, taking a slow sip of ice water, my heart pounding in my ears. I was actually thinking about Grandpa Soren the other day. It is such a terrible shame his estate has been tied up in probate for so incredibly long. Beckett is getting older so fast, and college tuition is certainly not getting any cheaper. Did the estate lawyers ever figure out that old trust fund situation? The entire dining table went completely, utterly dead silent for a fraction of a second. The tension in the air spiked immediately. Avellini shot a very nervous, wide-eyed glance at my father. My father cleared his throat loudly, suddenly looking extremely interested in folding his linen napkin. But my mother, Callista, heavily emboldened by the wine and decades of facing absolutely zero consequences for her actions, scoffed loudly. She waved a hand dismissively in my direction, her jewelry clinking. "Oh, Sloane, please stop worrying about old money you were never going to see anyway," Callista said, her voice dripping with heavy condescension. Soren was a senile old fool at the very end. The lawyers sorted it all out properly. The money went to protect the family business and to secure Avellini's future, as it should. I kept my voice incredibly light, perfectly innocent. But wasn't the original trust meant for all the grandchildren? And the great-grandchildren? I looked very pointedly at Beckett, who was quietly eating his carrots, ignoring the adults. Callista leaned forward aggressively, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. She had fallen right into the trap. The recording app securely hidden in my blazer pocket captured every single vile syllable perfectly. "Soren's money belongs to real family, Sloane," she hissed, her true, ugly colors flashing brightly under the expensive crystal chandelier. "Not paper children. We protected the family legacy. We kept the bloodline pure. You should honestly be thanking us for handling this quietly instead of dragging this out into the open." My father nodded in stern agreement. "We did exactly what was necessary to protect our own blood. That money is doing real, important work now. You have your little trucking business, you are perfectly fine." I felt a freezing cold shiver run all the way down my spine. They had admitted it. Openly. On tape. They admitted to aggressively diverting the funds, and they proudly admitted the racist, hateful motivation behind it. I had absolutely everything Delphine needed. Delphine was going to have an absolute field day with this audio. I was just about to stand up, make a polite excuse about feeling unwell, and leave the house forever. The trap was perfectly sprung. The evidence was secured. But then, little Beckett reached his trembling hand for the cranberry sauce. And the heavy glass bowl slipped. How could a single, tiny spilled drop of red sauce violently unleash the very hell I had spent weeks carefully preparing to rain down upon them? We are immediately thrust back to the horrific, chaotic moment. The dark red sauce hitting Avellini's expensive green silk dress. Her screaming at the top of her lungs, "He is not real family. Get out." And then the spit. I literally saw the saliva fly through the air and land with a wet smack on my son's soft cheek. I saw him scramble backward in absolute terror, hitting the hard wooden floor with a heavy thud. The digital recording device hidden in my blazer pocket was still running, capturing the sickening wet sound, the thud of his small body falling, and the heavy, cowardly, disgusting silence of my parents watching it happen. The freezing cold calm I felt wash over me was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. It was surgical. I wiped my son's face with a napkin. I picked his trembling body up. Merrick, who had been completely frozen by the window, suddenly snapped out of his trance. 34 years of being psychologically conditioned to silently endure his own family's toxic behavior violently shattered in an instant when he saw his innocent son physically assaulted. He let out a raw, furious, guttural sound, a sound I had never, ever heard him make before. He lunged forward and shoved his heavy dining chair so incredibly hard it crashed into the wall, shattering a framed, expensive photograph of Avellini into dozens of pieces. "Don't you ever touch him again," Merrick roared, his face flushed bright red with pure, protective rage. My father jumped back from the table, raising his hands defensively in sudden alarm. My mother gasped loudly, theatrically clutching her chest pearls as if she were the victim being attacked. "Merrick, control yourself immediately," My father yelled, desperately trying to regain his false sense of authority in the room. Avellini is just upset about her ruined dress. The boy is clumsy and ruined a very expensive garment. I firmly put a hand on Marek's tense arm. I did not need him to fight them with his fists. I was about to execute them completely with paper. I reached into my large leather bag and pulled out the thick manila envelope I had meticulously prepared with Delphine earlier that week. It contained pristine copies of the forged signature, the detailed bank wire transfers, the commercial debt acquisition documents, and the draft of the massive federal civil suit we were officially filing the very next morning at 8 a.m. I walked slowly over to where Avellini was standing. She was still breathing heavily, her face flushed with anger and toxic superiority. I dropped the heavy envelope right onto the center of her plate. It landed with a loud thud, splashing a tiny bit of brown gravy onto the white paper envelope. I looked her dead in the eye. I made absolutely sure my voice was loud, clear, and perfectly enunciated enough for the recording device to pick up every word. My lawyer is already involved, Avellini. Avellini's smug, triumphant expression faltered instantly. She looked down at the envelope as if it were a bomb, then back up at me. What is this? Are you seriously suing me over a ruined dress? You are completely pathetic, Sloane. No, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. I am suing you for $450,000. I am suing you for federal wire fraud. I am suing you for legally forging my signature on a federal banking document. And as of yesterday afternoon, Sloan Logistics officially owns the commercial debt on your failing spa. I am your landlord, Avellini. And you are being legally evicted. The heavy silver fork slipped entirely from her trembling fingers. It hit the china plate with a loud clatter. The color completely drained from my father's face, turning him a sickly shade of gray. He looked like he was going to vomit right there on the rug. Sloan, what are you talking about? What documents? The trust fund, Dad, I said, turning my cold, unblinking gaze directly to him. The one you illegally drained to buy that German car sitting in the driveway and fund her fake business. I found the documents at the warehouse. I saw the red pen. Not blood, right? That's what you wrote. My mother let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp. You went through our private mail? That is a federal crime, Sloan. No, Mom. Misdelivered commercial mail processed through my registered commercial warehouse is subject to standard misdirection review laws. But purposely forging a signature to steal $500,000 from a minor? That gets you 10 to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Avellini's knees visibly buckled. She actually had to grab the edge of the heavy mahogany table with both hands just to keep from collapsing onto the floor. The sheer, overwhelming magnitude of what I had just said crushed the air entirely out of the room. The arrogance they had proudly worn like a crown for decades evaporated into thin air in exactly 5 seconds. You're lying, Avellini whispered, her voice trembling so hard it cracked. But she didn't dare reach out to open the envelope. She knew exactly what was inside. Open it, I commanded, pointing at the paper. Read it. And then I highly suggest you call your little spa manager tonight and tell them not to bother opening the doors tomorrow morning. Because my security team is chaining them shut at exactly 8 a.m. I turned around. Marek had Beckett securely in his strong arms, his little face buried deep in Marek's shoulder. We walked out of the dining room together. We walked down the long hallway. We walked out the front door, and we did not look back once. As I opened the front door to step into the cool night air, I heard the sharp sound of tearing paper coming from the dining room. And then a scream. Not a scream of anger, but a scream of pure, unadulterated terror. It was my father, finally realizing the immense depth of the legal grave he had dug for himself. We got into our car. Marek locked the doors and started the engine, peeling out of the driveway. The drive away from that toxic house felt like flying. I pulled my phone from my pocket and finally stopped the recording. I had the confession. I had the assault. I had the climax. Within 10 short minutes, my phone began to vibrate wildly. There were dozens of missed calls from my father. Frantic, emotionally manipulative text messages from my mother begging me to come back and talk like a real family. Deranged threats from Avellini saying she was going to call the police and claim Merrick assaulted her. The massive legal war had officially begun. The flying monkeys were about to be unleashed, and the family was going to try absolutely everything to destroy my reputation before I could destroy their lives. But they had no idea that I still had one more powerful ally waiting patiently in the shadows, holding a secret so explosive it would leave them with absolutely nothing. What happens when the people you trusted most turn the entire extended family against you, and the federal law finally knocks on your front door? Please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to hear how this massive legal war unfolds. Leave a comment below if you think I went too far, or if you think they got exactly what they deserved. The fallout is crazier than you can imagine. The immediate aftermath of that Thanksgiving dinner was like standing in the center of a hurricane. By the time Merrick pulled our car into our driveway, my cell phone was dangerously close to overheating from the sheer volume of notifications pouring in. They were not just missed calls anymore. The desperate panic from my parents had rapidly morphed into vicious, calculated anger. They realized I was not bluffing, so they resorted to the only tactic narcissists truly know. They decided to play the ultimate victim. At exactly 6 in the morning the very next day, my phone buzzed with a notification from Facebook. Avellini had posted a massive, multi-paragraph essay accompanied by a tearful, heavily filtered selfie. The post was a masterclass in manipulation. She spun a wild, fabricated tale about how her deeply jealous, mentally unstable older sister had violently crashed their peaceful Thanksgiving dinner. She claimed I had suffered a psychotic break, screamed obscenities at our elderly parents, and that my husband Merrick had physically assaulted her, shattering family heirlooms in a terrifying fit of rage. She did not mention the trust fund. She did not mention the forged signature. And she most certainly did not mention spitting on an 8-year-old child. She ended the post asking for prayers for her safety and her family's healing. Within minutes, the flying monkeys descended. My inbox was instantly flooded with vitriol from extended relatives I had not spoken to in over a decade. Aunts, uncles, and distant cousins sent me paragraphs of pure venom. They called me a monster. They said I was an ungrateful daughter trying to destroy my sister's hard-earned success because my own life was so miserable. One cousin even left a voicemail saying I deserved to have my son taken away by Child Protective Services. It hurt. I will not pretend it did not sting to see people who shared my last name so easily believe that I was the villain. But the pain was quickly overshadowed by a dark, intense satisfaction because I knew exactly what was coming next. Delphine and I had meticulously planned for this exact social media smear campaign. We knew they would try to control the narrative. The real escalation happened at noon. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping black coffee and ignoring the hateful text messages, when a heavy, authoritative knock echoed through the house. I opened the front door to find 2 uniformed city police officers standing on my porch. "Sloan," the older officer asked, his expression stern and unyielding. "We need to speak with your husband, Merrick. We received a formal complaint of domestic assault and property destruction filed late last night by an Avellini." Merrick walked up behind me, his face turning pale. Avellini had actually gone to the police. She was trying to have my husband arrested on fabricated charges to gain leverage in the upcoming civil suit. It was a bold, incredibly stupid move. I did not panic. I simply stepped aside and invited the officers into our living room. "Officers, I understand my sister filed a report," I said, keeping my voice utterly calm and professional. "She claimed my husband physically attacked her and destroyed property during Thanksgiving dinner, correct?" "That is the allegation, ma'am," the younger officer said, pulling out a small notepad. "She stated she was in fear for her life." I nodded slowly. "I see. Well, it is incredibly fortunate that I happen to be extremely cautious about my personal safety." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the audio file I had saved in 3 different secure cloud locations. I placed the phone on the coffee table, turned the volume all the way up, and pressed play. The officers listened in stunned silence. They heard the clinking of glasses. They heard my mother openly admitting to stealing the trust fund to keep the bloodline pure. They heard the terrifying sound of Avellini screaming at my son to get out. They heard the wet, unmistakable sound of her spitting on him, followed by Beckett hitting the floor in tears. And then, they heard Merrick yelling at them to never touch his son again, followed by the sound of a single chair falling over. There was no physical assault. There was only a mother defending her abused child with legal documents and a father yelling at the abusers. When the recording ended, the heavy silence in the living room was deafening. The older officer slowly closed his notepad, his jaw clenched tight. The stern, suspicious look he had given Merrick vanished entirely, replaced by a look of deep, profound disgust directed toward the people who had filed the false report. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice lowering significantly. "Is your son okay?" "He is safe now," I replied firmly. "But as you can hear, the only assault that occurred last night was committed by my sister against an 8-year-old boy. I will be forwarding this audio directly to my attorney to append to the federal wire fraud and grand theft charges we are filing this afternoon. Would you like a digital copy for your false reporting investigation?" The officer nodded gravely. "Yes. I highly suggest you let your lawyer handle this from here on out. Filing a false police report is a serious misdemeanor. We will be paying your sister a visit today to discuss the severe consequences of wasting police resources to cover up financial crimes." As the officers walked out the door, my phone buzzed again. It was my office receptionist. "Sloan," she whispered, sounding confused. "You have a visitor down here. She says she does not have an appointment, but she insists it is a family emergency. She says her name is Veda." My breath hitched. Aunt Veda. My mother's estranged sister. The woman who had been viciously banished from the family 15 years ago for daring to call my parents out on their toxic narcissism. I had not seen her since I was a teenager. What on earth was she doing at my logistics warehouse? I practically flew out the door and drove straight to my commercial logistics facility. When I walked into the main reception area, I saw her sitting quietly on a leather sofa. Aunt Veda looked older, her hair fully silver, but she still possessed the same sharp, observant eyes that always made my mother incredibly nervous. She was wearing a practical wool coat and held a heavy, battered metal lockbox on her lap. "Hello, Sloan," Veda said, her voice warm but carrying a heavy weight. "I saw Avellini's deranged Facebook post this morning. I knew instantly that the day of reckoning had finally arrived." I led her back into my private office, locking the heavy door behind us. I poured her a glass of water, my mind racing with 100 different questions. "Aunt Veda, I haven't seen you since I was in high school. Mom told everyone you moved away because you hated us." Veda let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Your mother is a spectacular liar, Sloan. I was exiled because I told your grandfather Soren the truth about how Callista and Ulrich were secretly treating you. I saw them funneling resources to Avellini while treating you like unpaid labor." Soren was furious. He knew exactly what they were capable of if left unchecked. She placed the heavy metal lockbox gently onto my desk. It looked incredibly old, the dark metal scratched and dented in several places. Soren knew his health was failing rapidly during those last few years, Veda explained, her eyes growing misty. He did not trust Ulrich to manage the estate fairly. He knew they would try to steal your rightful share to fund their ridiculous lifestyle. But more importantly, he knew about your fertility struggles, Sloan. We talked about it. He knew you were planning to adopt one day, and he knew Callista's disgusting views on bloodlines. My hands started to tremble. I stared at the locked box. "What is in there, Veda?" Veda reached into her purse and pulled out a small, ornate brass key. 2 months before he passed away, Soren had his personal lawyers draft a very specific set of documents. He gave them to me and made me swear on my life to hide them. He told me to wait in the shadows. He said, "Callista's greed will eventually force her hand. When she tries to take everything, Veda, that is when you give this to Sloan. I have kept it hidden in a safe deposit box for 4 long years, just waiting for them to make their fatal mistake." She slid the brass key across the desk. I picked it up, my fingers numb, and fitted it into the lock. It turned with a heavy, satisfying click. I opened the lid. Inside rested a pristine, thick manila folder bearing the embossed seal of my grandfather's primary law firm. I carefully opened it. Sitting right on top was a handwritten letter from Grandpa Soren, addressed directly to me. The ink was slightly faded, but his elegant handwriting was undeniable. My dearest Sloane, if you are reading this, it means my worst fears about your parents have unfortunately come true. I have watched you work yourself to the bone for a family that refuses to see your brilliant light. I know you will build your own empire, but you deserve the security I promised you. More importantly, I know you have so much love to give a child. Any child you choose to call your own is my family, eternally and unconditionally. Do not let them win, Sloane. Use the tools I have provided below to take back what belongs to you and your children. Make them face the consequences of their greed. I am so profoundly proud of the woman you have become. Love always, Grandpa Soren. A single tear finally escaped my eye and dropped onto the desk. I wiped it away fiercely and turned to the legal documents beneath the letter. It was the true, original master trust agreement. But it contained a massive, heavily fortified addendum that my parents had never seen, secretly notarized and filed with a secondary out-of-state legal firm. Delphine was going to weep with joy when she saw this. I read the bolded legal text aloud, my voice shaking with adrenaline. Clause 42, Protection of Adopted Heirs. Should the primary acting trustee, Ulrich, or the secondary trustee, Callista, attempt to alter, reduce, or intentionally deny the rightful financial inheritance of any legally adopted beneficiary based on biological lineage, their roles as trustees shall be immediately and irrevocably terminated. I gasped, reading the next paragraph. Upon triggering this termination clause, the entirety of the estate's financial control, including all remaining assets, real estate holdings, and legal authorities, shall be instantly transferred to my granddaughter, Sloane. She shall become the sole, undisputed executor of the entire family trust. I slowly looked up at Aunt Veda. The implications of this document were truly staggering. I didn't just have grounds to sue my parents for the $450,000 they stole. Veda, I whispered, the reality washing over me like a tidal wave. This means my parents aren't in charge of the money anymore. They haven't been in charge since the exact moment they crossed Beckett's name out. Exactly, Veda smiled, a fierce, protective glint in her eyes. Every single financial move they have made since that day is legally void. The house they live in, the investment portfolios they boast about, the remaining trust accounts, legally, Sloane, you own it all. You are the captain of the ship now, and they're about to drown in the wake. I picked up my phone and dialed Delphine's private number. When she answered, I didn't even say hello. Delphine. Cancel the standard civil suit draft. Call the federal marshals. I have the kill shot. The execution of our plan happened with the swift, merciless precision of a military strike. It was Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the Thanksgiving disaster. My parents were still aggressively spinning their victim narrative to anyone who would listen, truly believing I was just a cowardly sister hiding from their fake police report. Avellini, riding high on the false support of the Flying Monkeys, decided it was the perfect time to host a massive promotional event at her holistic wellness spa to show the world how unbothered and successful she was. I sat in the passenger seat of Delphine's sleek black sedan, parked discreetly across the street from the Cypress Creek Commercial Plaza. Behind us idled 2 massive, heavy-duty tow trucks dispatched directly from my own logistics fleet, driven by my biggest, most loyal warehouse guys. Beside them parked a black SUV containing a county sheriff and 2 deputies, holding official court orders. I pulled up Avellini's social media account on my tablet. She was broadcasting live to hundreds of her followers. The video showed her standing in the lobby of her spa. The place was dripping in fake serenity. It smelled strongly of expensive sage and eucalyptus through the screen. She was wearing another ridiculously expensive outfit, holding a crystal singing bowl, and speaking in that soft, fake spiritual voice she always used for clients. Thank you all so much for your incredible support this week, Avellini cooed into the camera, blinking away imaginary tears. It has been a very dark time for my family, dealing with some toxic energy from certain estranged relatives. But we are choosing light. We are choosing healing. And today, anyone who books a premium aura cleansing gets 20% off. I locked the tablet and looked at Delphine. She wore a shark-like smile. Are you ready to cleanse her aura, Sloane? Let's go, I said, stepping out of the car. I walked across the sunny parking lot, flanked by the sheriff, the deputies, and my two massive tow truck drivers. As we approached the spa's glass storefront, I could see Avellini through the window, still holding her phone, surrounded by about a dozen wealthy clients browsing expensive face creams. I pushed the heavy glass door open. The little silver bell above it chimed brightly, cutting through the serene spa music playing on the hidden speakers. Avellini looked up, still smiling for her live stream. When her eyes locked onto mine, the smile physically slid off her face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She lowered her phone slightly, but the live broadcast was still running. Sloane, Avellini hissed, her voice dropping its fake sweetness, glancing nervously at the uniformed officers behind me. What the hell are you doing here? You need to leave right now. You are trespassing on my private business property. I stopped in the center of the lobby. I did not raise my voice. I spoke clearly, ensuring the dozen clients in the room and the hundreds watching online heard every single word. Actually, Avellini, you are the one trespassing on my property, I stated calmly, pulling a thick stack of legal documents from my bag. I handed the first document to the sheriff. He reviewed it quickly, then stepped forward. Avellini, the sheriff announced in a booming voice. I am serving you with an immediate commercial eviction notice. According to these legally binding documents, Sloane Logistics LLC is the sole holder of your commercial lease debt. You are currently 6 months delinquent on your rent payments, totaling over $80,000 in arrears. The clients in the lobby gasped. A woman holding an expensive bottle of lotion slowly placed it back on the shelf, backing away toward the door. That is a lie. Avellini shrieked, her face turning a blotchy, ugly red. She pointed a trembling finger at me. My dad pays the rent. He handles the business accounts. Your dad used stolen money to pay your rent, Avellini, I corrected her coldly. And when the stolen money ran out, you defaulted. I bought the debt from the plaza owners for pennies. I am your landlord. And as of 10 seconds ago, your lease is officially terminated. I signaled my warehouse guys. They immediately stepped forward and began placing heavy, industrial chains and thick brass padlocks on the secondary exit doors of the spa. Stop it. You can't do this. Avellini screamed, dropping her phone. It hit the floor, still broadcasting the audio of her spectacular downfall to the entire internet. She ran toward me, raising her hands as if she were going to strike me, but the sheriff quickly stepped between us, putting a stern hand on her shoulder. Ma'am, I highly advise you to step back, the sheriff warned. You have exactly 1 hour to gather your personal belongings and vacate these premises. If you remain after that time, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. Avellini began hyperventilating, tears of genuine panic streaming down her ruined makeup. Her fake empire was crumbling in real time in front of her most important clients. But I was not finished. The poetry of this moment required one final, devastating verse. I walked over to the large front window and tapped on the glass, pointing toward the parking lot. Avellini turned her head to look. Right outside, parked in the designated VIP spot, was her pristine, shiny white $90,000 Porsche. One of my massive tow trucks had just backed up to it. The driver was currently securing thick metal hooks under the front axle. What are they doing to my car? Avellini wailed, rushing toward the window, banging her fists uselessly against the thick glass. Stop them. That is my car. It's paid for. Delphine stepped up beside me, her arms crossed, looking entirely unbothered. Actually, Avellini, Delphine said smoothly, that vehicle was purchased using funds obtained through federal wire fraud and forged signatures. It is currently being seized as evidence by the authorities and will eventually be sold at auction to partially repay the $450,000 you and your parents stole from an 8-year-old boy's trust fund. The hydraulic lift on the tow truck whined loudly. The front end of the expensive sports car lifted into the air. Avellini collapsed right there on the polished hardwood floor of her lobby. She curled into a ball, sobbing uncontrollably, surrounded by half-empty displays of healing crystals and the harsh reality of her own actions. The clients quickly hurried out the door, wanting no part in a federal crime scene. The entire facade was gone. The golden child was sitting in the ruins of a business she never actually earned, watching her stolen car get dragged away by a truck displaying my company's logo. I looked down at her one last time. There was no pity in my heart. Only the cold, hard justice she so desperately deserved. "I told you my lawyer was involved," I said quietly. I turned and walked out the door, leaving her to scream alone in the empty spa. The formal deposition took place exactly 3 weeks later, in the massive, soundproof conference room of Delphine's downtown law firm. The air conditioning was turned down freezing cold, making the room feel like a sterile morgue. I sat silently next to Delphine, wearing a sharp black suit, feeling an incredible sense of grounded power. Across the long mahogany table sat my father, Ulrich, my mother, Callista, and Avellini. They looked atrocious. The stress of the last few weeks had aged them a decade. My father's usually perfect hair was unkempt. My mother had dark, heavy bags under her eyes, and Avellini sat slumped in her chair, staring blankly at the legal pads in front of her. They had hired a cheap, sleazy defense attorney who looked visibly sweating and entirely out of his depth. Despite losing the spa and the car, they still clung desperately to their arrogance. They honestly believed they could lie their way out of this room. They thought if they just stuck to their story, it would become a messy, she said, family dispute that no judge would want to touch. They had no idea about Grandpa Soren's secret clause. The court reporter hit record on the stenography machine. The deposition began. Delphine did not play games. She started dropping the evidence onto the table like a dealer laying out a royal flush. First, the bank statements. She forced my father, under oath, to acknowledge the massive withdrawals. "Mr. Ulrich," Delphine asked, her voice sharp as glass. "Did you authorize the transfer of $450,000 from the Soren Trust directly into a private LLC controlled solely by you?" "It was an emergency family loan," my father lied smoothly, adjusting his tie. Sloan was fully aware of it. "We discussed it verbally." Delphine smiled. It was a terrifying sight. She slid the document with a forged signature across the table. "Interesting. Because this authorization document bears a signature claiming to be Sloan's. We had an independent forensic handwriting expert analyze this document yesterday. Their sworn affidavit states, unequivocally, that this signature is a crude forgery." "Who forged this document, Ulrich?" My father swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. I don't recall who signed that specific paper. It was a busy time. "Perjury is a federal offense, Ulrich," Delphine reminded him coldly. "Let's move on. Let's discuss your true motivations for draining this account." Delphine pressed a button on her laptop. The audio recording from Thanksgiving filled the quiet conference room. My mother's venomous voice echoed off the walls. "Soren's money belongs to real families, Sloan. Not paper children. We protected the legacy. We kept the bloodline pure." My mother gasped, throwing her hands over her face. Avellini looked physically ill. Their cheap defense lawyer actually buried his face in his hands, realizing his clients had confessed to a hate-motivated financial crime on crystal-clear audio. "You stole the money because you hated a legally adopted child," Delphine summarized brutally. "You committed wire fraud to punish an 8-year-old boy for not sharing your DNA. We are the trustees," my father suddenly shouted, slamming his fist on the table, his fake composure finally shattering. "We had the legal right to manage those funds as we saw fit to protect the family. Soren left me in charge. It was my right." Right on cue, the heavy conference room door opened. Aunt Veda walked in. My mother let out a terrified shriek. "Veda? What is she doing here? Get her out." Veda walked calmly to our side of the table and handed Delphine the original, secret trust addendum. Delphine placed it directly in front of my father. "Read Clause 42, Ulrich," Delphine commanded. "Read it out loud for the record." My father picked up the paper with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the text. I watched in real time as the last remaining shred of his arrogant soul left his body. His lips moved, but no sound came out. "I will read it," Delphine said loudly. "Should the trustees attempt to deny the inheritance of any adopted beneficiary based on biological lineage, their roles are instantly terminated. All financial control, including all remaining assets and real estate, transfers immediately to Sloan. You haven't been the trustee for 4 years, Ulrich. You stole money from an account you had zero legal authority over. You are not just facing a civil suit. The district attorney has already drafted the criminal indictment for grand theft." The word criminal hung in the freezing air. Federal prison. That was the exact moment the toxic family loyalty entirely collapsed. Narcissists will always throw each other to the wolves to save their own skin. Ulrich jumped up from his chair, his eyes wild with terror. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my mother. "It was her idea," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Callista made me do it. She said we needed the money for Avellini. She told me to practice Sloane's signature on the kitchen table. I didn't want to do it." "You cowardly bastard!" Callista shrieked back, standing up and actually throwing her heavy purse at his head. "You drove the Porsche. You signed the LLC papers. Don't you dare put this all on me." Avellini began sobbing hysterically, covering her ears. "Stop it. Stop it. My life is ruined. You ruined everything." I sat back in my leather chair, watching them literally tear each other apart in front of a court reporter. The Museum of Pain had finally caught fire, and they had struck the match themselves. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but when they finally crush you, they grind you into fine dust. The legal fallout over the next 8 months was profound, public, and utterly devastating for my former family. Because I was legally recognized as the sole executor of the trust, I had the undeniable authority to liquidate their assets to recover the stolen funds for Beckett's account. The judge's final ruling was merciless. Ulrich and Callista were officially stripped of all remaining fiduciary power. They were ordered by a federal judge to fully repay the stolen $450,000, along with a punitive penalty of $50,000 for egregious breach of duty. Because they had lived vastly beyond their means for decades, heavily relying on the trust to fund their wealthy facade, they did not have the cash. The court forced the immediate sale of the massive, pristine suburban house I grew up in. I watched from down the street in my car the day the moving trucks arrived. My parents, looking incredibly old and defeated, carried cheap cardboard boxes out the front door, leaving behind their custom marble kitchen and their fake status in the community. The house sold, the money went straight into a heavily protected account for Beckett, and my parents were left with a tiny fraction of the equity. Avellini did not escape the fire. Because she was a willing participant in receiving stolen federal funds, she faced serious charges. She managed to avoid hard prison time by throwing our parents under the bus during her own plea deal, fully admitting they orchestrated the fraud. She was sentenced to 200 hours of grueling community service, picking up trash on the side of the highway in a bright orange vest. She received 3 years of strict probation, and she now possessed a permanent felony record for financial fraud. Her dreams of being a wealthy, high-society influencer were permanently dead. No bank would ever give her a business loan again. One rainy Tuesday evening in November, almost exactly a year after that fateful Thanksgiving, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown local number. I answered it cautiously. "Sloan?" a voice whispered. It was raspy, broken, and small. It took me a moment to realize it was my mother, Callista. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of any anger or sadness. I felt absolutely nothing for her anymore. "Sloan, please," Callista sobbed through the speaker. "We are living in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment on the east side. The heating barely works. Your father is working as a part-time cashier at a hardware store just to buy groceries. Avellini won't speak to us anymore. She blames us for everything. We have nothing left. We are so sorry. Can't we just try to be a family again? Can you find it in your heart to forgive us?" I stood by the window in my warm, beautiful home, watching the rain fall on the street outside. I thought about the decades of subtle emotional torture. I thought about the red pen crossing out my son's name. I thought about the spit landing on his cheek while she watched and did nothing. You made your choice a long time ago, Callista, I said, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. You built a family based entirely on bloodlines and bank accounts. You lied, you stole, and you spat on your own grandson. You are reaping exactly what you sowed. Sloane, please, I am your mother, she wailed desperately. No, you are just a biological donor, I replied quietly. Enjoy your real family, Callista. Do not ever call this number again. I hung up the phone. I blocked the number. I walked into the kitchen and threw the phone onto the counter. The silence in my house was not heavy or toxic. It was the beautiful, peaceful quiet of a fortress that has successfully repelled the invaders and finally locked the gates. 1 year later. Thanksgiving Day. The atmosphere in my own dining room could not have been more profoundly different from the nightmare of the previous year. My house was filled with the rich, mouth-watering smell of roasted turkey, fresh baked bread, and cinnamon. But more importantly, it was filled with genuine, loud, unguarded laughter. We had 12 chairs around our large, rustic dining table, and every single one was occupied by someone who actively, joyfully chose to be there. Merrick was in the kitchen, proudly carving a slightly crooked but perfectly cooked turkey, wearing a silly apron and smiling so hard his eyes crinkled. Aunt Veda sat at the head of the table, holding a glass of wine, loudly telling a hilarious, slightly inappropriate story about her recent travels to Europe. Next to her sat Delphine, the ruthless lawyer who had helped me save my family, looking relaxed and actually smiling in a casual sweater. Even Xander, the property manager who helped me buy the spa's debt, was there with his lovely wife, sharing stories about the chaotic world of commercial real estate. And right in the middle of it all sat Beckett. He was 9 years old now. He looked taller, stronger, and infinitely happier. The heavy shadow of anxiety he used to carry around my relatives was entirely gone. He was laughing loudly at a joke Xander made, his face glowing with warmth and pure innocence. Nobody rolled their eyes at him. Nobody criticized him. He was cherished exactly as a child should be. This was my family. Not a family forged by the random accident of shared DNA, but a family built intentionally through mutual respect, fierce loyalty, and unconditional love. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and the dishes were put away, I walked upstairs to tuck Beckett into bed. He was already in his pajamas, buried under a pile of warm blankets, clutching a new book Aunt Veda had given him. I sat on the edge of his bed, brushing his soft hair back from his forehead. "Did you have a good Thanksgiving, buddy?" I asked softly. He nodded enthusiastically, his brown eyes shining. "It was the best one ever, Mom. The food was so good, and Aunt Veda is incredibly funny." He paused for a moment, his expression turning thoughtful. He looked down at his blanket, picking at a loose thread. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Are we a real family now?" he asked, his voice quiet, revealing a tiny remnant of the insecurity my parents had cruelly planted in his mind. My heart squeezed, but this time, it was not out of pain. It was out of overwhelming love. I leaned down and kissed his forehead gently. "Family isn't about blood, my sweet boy," I told him, looking deep into his eyes so he would remember these words forever. "Family is the people who show up for you, especially when it is hard. Family is the people who protect you. Family is the people who never, ever make you feel like you have to earn their love. You are my son. You are my heart. We are the realest family in the world." A huge, beautiful smile spread across his face. He wrapped his small arms around my neck and hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, Beckett. So much." I turned off his bedside lamp, leaving the small night light glowing in the corner. I walked out into the quiet hallway and slowly walked downstairs into my dark, peaceful kitchen. For the very first time in my 32 years of life, the heavy armor I had worn to survive was finally gone. I felt deeply, profoundly, and permanently at peace. Some of my distant relatives still occasionally try to message me from fake accounts, calling me a monster. They say I was way too cruel to my own elderly parents and my young sister over just a little bit of spit and some money. They say I should have handled it privately and protected the family name. Tell me, Internet, was I too harsh for destroying their entire lives over what they did to my son? Or did those toxic, arrogant people get exactly the devastating karma they truly deserved? Thank you so much for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, or if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. It truly means the world to me.